The moment Isabella Sterling called him just a janitor in front of the entire executive board, Andre Coleman knew his life was about to change forever. What she didn't know was that the man pushing a mop across her marble floors held a master's degree in German legal translation and had once negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions. Now, clutching a 40-page acquisition document written entirely in German, she was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her career: that the people you ignore are often the ones who can save you. If you want to see how far a single moment of truth can travel, drop a comment with your city below and smash that like button. This is a story about dignity, hidden brilliance, and the night everything changed. Andre Coleman moved through the 93rd floor of Sterling Global headquarters like a shadow. It was just past 8 in the evening, and the executive suite had mostly emptied out, or so it appeared. His mop whispered across the polished marble in steady, rhythmic strokes, the bucket wheels squeaking faintly behind him. He'd learned long ago how to make himself invisible. Not because he wanted to disappear, but because it made the work easier. People said things around janitors they'd never say around colleagues. They dropped papers, left doors open, forgot entire conversations the moment he walked past. That was fine with Andre. He wasn't here to be noticed. He was here to get paid. The hallway smelled like expensive leather and cold coffee. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched along the outer wall, offering a glittering view of the city below. Andre didn't look at it much anymore. When he'd first started this job 9 months ago, he used to pause and stare out at the skyline, wondering what his life might have looked like if things had gone differently. But that kind of thinking didn't pay the rent. It didn't put food in his son's lunchbox or keep the lights on in their one-bedroom apartment across town. So he stopped looking. He was halfway through the executive corridor when he heard voices, raised voices, coming from the main boardroom at the end of the hall. Andre slowed his pace, instinct kicking in. The door was cracked open just enough for sound to spill out, sharp and tense. "This is a disaster, Isabella. An absolute disaster." That was Richard Calloway, the CFO. Andre recognized the voice, clipped, impatient, always sounding like he was 2 seconds away from firing someone. "I'm aware of that, Richard." The second voice was cooler, controlled, but tight with frustration. Isabella Sterling, 34 years old, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and according to office gossip, one of the most ruthless executives in the industry. Andre had only seen her a handful of times, always from a distance. She moved fast, talked faster, and didn't make eye contact with people like him. "We've been going over this contract for hours," another voice chimed in, older, male, probably Gerald Shue, the general counsel. "The German is dense, the clauses are contradictory, and our translator says it'll take at least another week to get a full breakdown." "We don't have a week," Isabella snapped. "The acquisition closes in 72 hours. If we don't sign, we lose the deal. If we do sign, and there's something buried in here we missed, we could be looking at liability in the hundreds of millions." Andre paused outside the door. He shouldn't be listening. He knew that. But something about the conversation pulled at him. Something familiar and uncomfortable, like hearing a song from a life he used to live. "Maybe we should just pull out," someone suggested. "Take the loss on due diligence and walk away." "Absolutely not." Isabella's voice was ice. "We've spent 18 months on this acquisition. I'm not walking away because our legal team can't do its job." There was a heavy silence. Andre resumed mopping, moving slowly toward the door. He didn't mean to get closer. Or maybe he did. Either way, when he reached the threshold, he glanced inside. The boardroom was massive. A long glass table stretched down the center, surrounded by leather chairs. 7 or 8 people sat around it, all in tailored suits, all looking exhausted and tense. Papers were scattered everywhere. Laptops glowed. Coffee cups littered the table. At the head of the table sat Isabella Sterling. She was smaller than Andre had expected. Petite, sharp-featured, with dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She wore a charcoal blazer and a white blouse, and her eyes, even from across the room, looked like they could cut steel. She was staring down at a thick stack of documents in front of her, her jaw tight. "This is supposed to be a straightforward acquisition," she said quietly. "A German manufacturing firm, solid financials, clean reputation. But this contract?" She tapped the stack with one finger. "This thing reads like it was written by a paranoid lawyer with a thesaurus and a vendetta." A few people around the table gave weak laughs. "It's not funny," she continued, her voice hardening. "We're about to stake the company's future on a deal we don't fully understand. That's not leadership. That's negligence." Andre's hand tightened on the mop handle. German legal translation. He knew that world. He'd lived in it. For 5 years, he'd been one of the best in the field, working for international firms, translating contracts, arbitration documents, regulatory filings. He'd been good, more than good. He'd been sharp, meticulous, the kind of translator people requested by name, and then everything fell apart. His wife got sick. The medical bills piled up. The insurance didn't cover half of it. Andre spent months trying to keep her alive, draining their savings, taking on debt, burning through every contact and every favor he had. When she finally passed, she left behind a mountain of bills and a 3-year-old son who didn't understand why his mother wasn't coming home. Andre tried to keep working, but grief was heavy, and the demands of his job required a clarity he didn't have anymore. He missed deadlines, made mistakes, lost clients. Within a year, he was out of the industry entirely. No one wanted a translator who couldn't be trusted to deliver. So he did what he had to do. He took the first job he could find that offered benefits and didn't ask too many questions. He became a janitor. That was 3 years ago. Andre turned to leave, to finish his work and stay invisible like he was supposed to. But as he moved, the wheel of his bucket caught on the doorframe and made a loud metallic scrape. Everyone in the room turned. Isabella's eyes landed on him like a spotlight. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone wasn't rude exactly, just distant, dismissive. "No, ma'am," Andre said quietly. "Just finishing up. I'll come back later." He started to pull the door closed, but Richard Calloway let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Yeah, that's what we need right now," Richard said. "A janitor's opinion on German contract law." A few people around the table smirked. Andre froze. Isabella didn't laugh. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Actually," she said slowly, "do you speak German?" The room went quiet. Andre hesitated. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room. "I do," he said finally. Isabella raised an eyebrow. "Fluently?" "Yes, ma'am." Richard scoffed. "Oh, come on, Isabella. We don't have time for this." But Isabella was already standing. She picked up the contract from the table and walked toward Andre. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor. She stopped a few feet away, holding the document out toward him. "If you speak German," she said evenly, "then read this." Andre looked down at the thick stack of pages in her hand. Even from where he stood, he could see the dense blocks of text, the formal legal phrasing, the unmistakable structure of a high-stakes acquisition agreement. "Go ahead," Isabella said. There was a challenge in her voice now, not cruel, but testing. "If you can read it, I'll listen." Andre set the mop against the wall. He stepped forward and took the contract. The room was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. He flipped to the first page, scanned it, then the second, the third. The German was technical, formal, laden with legal jargon, but it was also familiar, comfortable, like slipping into an old jacket he hadn't worn in years. He kept reading. Isabella crossed her arms. "Well?" Andre looked up. "This is a purchase agreement for a German firm called Reinhardt Maschinenbau, GmbH. You're acquiring full ownership in exchange for cash and stock options valued at approximately $1.2 billion. Richard rolled his eyes. "We already know that." Andre ignored him. He flipped to page 7. "But there's a section here, Haftungsausschluss und Risikoübertragung, that limits your liability protections. It says that any environmental violations discovered within 5 years of closing are retroactively transferred to the acquiring party." Isabella's expression shifted. "What?" Andre turned to page 12. "And here, Versteckte Verpflichtungen, hidden obligations. This clause obligates you to assume all outstanding debts tied to a subsidiary that isn't even listed in the asset schedule." Gerald Shue leaned forward. "Wait, say that again." Andre kept going, his voice steady. "There's also a clause here that waives your right to audit the company's environmental compliance records before closing. And another one that holds you responsible for any labor disputes that occurred in the last 10 years, even if they were settled before acquisition." The room erupted. "That's not possible," someone said. "Let me see that," Gerald snapped, reaching for the document. Isabella held up a hand. "Let him finish." Andre flipped through more pages, his mind moving faster now, pulling apart the contract with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. There are at least 6 major clauses in here that shift liability onto you, he said. Environmental violations, hidden debts, pension obligations, legal settlements. If you sign this as written, you're not just buying a company, you're buying every problem they've ever had. Isabella's face had gone pale. How much are we talking? She asked quietly. Andre did the math in his head. Conservatively, 300 to 400 million in potential liability, maybe more. The room went dead silent. Richard Calloway looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Isabella stared at Andre for a long moment. Then she turned to Gerald. Is he right? Gerald was already flipping through the contract, his face tight. I need to verify this, but if he's right, he's right, Isabella said flatly. She looked back at Andre. Isn't he? Andre nodded. Isabella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was something new there. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition. Who are you? She asked. Andre Coleman, he said. I work the night shift. That's not what I meant. Isabella stepped closer. Where did you learn to read contracts like that? Andre hesitated. He could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. I used to be a legal translator, he said quietly. German to English, corporate and regulatory work. I did it for 5 years before I had to stop. Why did you stop? Andre's throat tightened. Personal reasons. Isabella studied him. For a moment, the hard edges of her expression softened just slightly. You just saved this company from the worst mistake of its history, she said. Do you understand that? Andre didn't answer. Isabella turned to the room. Meeting's over. Gerald, I want a full review of this contract by tomorrow morning. Richard, cancel the signing until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Everyone else, go home. People started gathering their things, murmuring quietly to each other. But Andre could feel their eyes on him, confused, surprised, some skeptical, some almost resentful. As the executives filed out, Isabella stayed behind. She walked over to where Andre stood and looked at him directly. I want to offer you a position, she said. Andre blinked. Ma'am? A real position, not cleaning floors. I want you in our legal department. Full-time, salary, benefits, the works. Andre's heart pounded. It was the kind of offer he would have killed for 3 years ago, the kind of offer that could change everything. But he didn't answer right away. Isabella frowned. Is there a problem? Andre met her eyes. You called me just a janitor. Isabella's expression flickered. You didn't have to say it, Andre interrupted quietly. But that's what everyone in this room thought. I was invisible until I was useful. Isabella's jaw tightened. For a moment, she looked like she was going to argue, but then she stopped. You're right, she said finally. I didn't see you. None of us did, and that was wrong. Andre didn't respond. But I'm seeing you now, Isabella continued, and I'm asking you to help us, not because I feel guilty, because you're the best person for the job. Andre looked down at the contract still in his hands. He thought about his son, asleep in their tiny apartment across town. He thought about the overdue bills on the kitchen counter, the groceries he couldn't afford, the future he was trying so hard to build. I'll think about it, he said. Isabella nodded slowly. Fair enough, but I need an answer soon. We don't have much time. She turned and walked toward the door. But before she left, she glanced back. Thank you, she said, for tonight. Andre watched her leave. Then he set the contract down on the table, picked up his mop, and finished his shift. But as he pushed the bucket down the empty hallway, he knew something had shifted. The invisible man had been seen, and there was no going back. When Andre finally clocked out just after midnight, the city outside was quiet and cold. He took the bus home, the same route he took every night, watching the dark streets slide past the window. His mind was still spinning. The apartment was dark when he unlocked the door. He set his keys down quietly and walked through the small living room to the bedroom. His son, Marcus, was asleep in the twin bed against the wall, his small body curled under a thick blanket. Andre stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him breathe. Marcus was 6 now, smart, curious, full of questions Andre didn't always know how to answer. He asked about his mother sometimes, asked why they didn't have a bigger place, asked why his dad worked at night. Andre always told him the truth, or as much of it as a 6-year-old could understand. I'm working so we can have a better life. So you can have everything you need. But standing there in the dark, Andre wondered if that was enough. Wondered if Marcus understood what it cost, what it took. He walked over and gently kissed his son's forehead. Marcus stirred but didn't wake. I love you, buddy, Andre whispered. Then he went to the kitchen, made himself a cup of instant coffee, and sat down at the small table. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen. He could still see Isabella's face, could still hear her voice. I want to offer you a position. It was everything he needed, everything he'd been fighting for. But something about it felt wrong. Not the job itself, but the way it had happened. The way he'd had to prove himself in front of people who would never have looked at him twice if he hadn't spoken up. Andre leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He'd been invisible for so long. And maybe that was easier, safer. But tonight, for the first time in years, someone had seen him. And that changed everything. The next morning, Andre woke up to the sound of Marcus jumping on the bed. Dad, wake up! Andre groaned and opened one eye. What time is it? 7:30. You said you'd make pancakes. Andre sat up slowly, rubbing his face. I did? Marcus nodded enthusiastically. You promised last week. Andre sighed, but he couldn't help smiling. All right, pancakes it is. They went to the kitchen together and Andre pulled out the ingredients: flour, eggs, milk. Marcus climbed up on a chair and watched, chattering about school, about his friend Devin, about the new Spider-Man movie he wanted to see. Andre listened, flipping pancakes on the stove, letting his son's voice wash over him. This was the part of his life that made sense, the part that mattered. Dad? Marcus said suddenly. Yeah, buddy? Are you okay? Andre looked down at him. Marcus was staring up at him with wide, serious eyes. Why do you ask? You look tired. Andre smiled softly. I'm okay. Just had a long night. Marcus nodded, satisfied. Okay. Can I have chocolate chips in mine? Sure. They ate breakfast together, and then Andre walked Marcus to the bus stop. The morning was cold, the sky gray and heavy. Marcus held his hand the whole way. Love you, Dad, Marcus said as the bus pulled up. Love you too. Andre watched the bus drive away, then turned and walked back to the apartment. He had 4 hours before he needed to sleep. 4 hours to figure out what the hell he was going to do. He sat down at the kitchen table again and pulled out his phone. He thought about calling Isabella, thought about saying yes, but instead he opened his email. There were 3 new messages, 2 were spam. The third was from Sterling Global's HR department. Subject: employment offer, legal translation specialist. Andre's heart skipped. He opened it. The email was formal, professional, outlining a full-time position in the legal department. The salary was more than double what he made as a janitor. Full benefits, paid time off, a signing bonus. At the bottom, there was a note. Andre, I meant what I said last night. We need you. Please consider this offer seriously. Isabella Sterling. Andre stared at the screen for a long time. He thought about Marcus, about the bills, about the future. And then he thought about the look on Isabella's face when she'd called him just a janitor. He thought about the executives who had laughed. He thought about all the years he'd spent invisible, unnoticed, ignored. And he made a decision. He hit reply. To Isabella Sterling. From Andre Coleman. Subject: employment offer, legal translation. Specialist. Ms. Sterling, thank you for the offer. I'm willing to accept, but I have one condition. If I'm going to work for Sterling Global, I need you to do something first. I need you to acknowledge publicly, in front of the same people who were in that boardroom last night, that the person you dismissed as just a janitor was the one who saved your company. Not because I need an apology, but because there are a lot of people like me in this building. People you don't see, people you don't think about. And if I'm going to be part of your company, I want to make sure that changes. Let me know. Andre Coleman. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Then he sat back and waited. The reply came 20 minutes later. Subject: Re. Employment offer. Legal translation. Specialist: Andre. Done. Be at the office tomorrow morning at 9. Boardroom. Same people. And wear something other than a uniform. Isabella. Andre read the message 3 times. Then he closed his laptop, stood up, and walked to his closet. He hadn't worn a suit in 3 years. It was time to change that. The next morning, Andre stood in front of the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the tie he hadn't touched in 3 years. The suit was tight across the shoulders. He'd put on muscle from pushing mops and lifting trash bins, but it still fit well enough. The navy fabric was slightly faded. The collar of the white shirt beneath had a small stain he couldn't quite get out. But when he looked at himself, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. He saw the man he used to be. Marcus appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, eyes wide. "Dad, you look fancy." Andre turned and smiled. "Yeah, you think so?" Marcus nodded. "Are you going to a wedding?" "Nobody. I'm going to work." "But you don't wear that to work." Andre knelt down so he was eye level with his son. "I'm going to a different kind of work today. A meeting." Marcus frowned, thinking it over. "Are you in trouble?" Andre's chest tightened. "No, I'm not in trouble. I'm trying to make things better. For us." Marcus seemed to accept that. He threw his arms around Andre's neck and squeezed tight. "Okay. Good luck, Dad." Andre held him for a moment, breathing in the smell of his son's hair, the warmth of his small body. Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. The bus ride downtown felt different this time. Andre sat near the back, watching the city wake up around him. People in suits rushed past on the sidewalks, clutching coffee cups and staring at their phones. He used to be one of them. Used to move through the world with purpose, with direction. Now he was stepping back into that world, but not the way he'd left it. This time, he was walking in on his own terms. Sterling Global Headquarters loomed ahead, all glass and steel, catching the morning light. Andre got off the bus a block early and walked the rest of the way, his breath visible in the cold air. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. When he stepped into the lobby, the security guard at the front desk looked up and did a double take. "Andre?" It was Miguel, one of the night guards Andre sometimes talked to during his shifts. "Hey, Miguel." Miguel looked him up and down, confused. "Man, what are you doing here? Your shift doesn't start until 8 tonight." "I've got a meeting," Andre said. Miguel raised an eyebrow. "A meeting? With who?" "Isabella Sterling." Miguel's jaw dropped. "You serious?" Andre nodded. "Damn." Miguel let out a low whistle. "Good luck, man. Whatever this is." Andre smiled faintly. "Thanks." He crossed the lobby and took the elevator up to the 93rd floor. The doors opened with a soft chime, and Andre stepped out into the executive suite. The morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor he'd mopped 100 times. But today, he wasn't here to clean. The boardroom door was closed. Andre could hear voices inside, muffled but tense. He glanced at his watch. 8:58. He was early. He took a deep breath and knocked. The voices stopped. A moment later, the door opened. It was Gerald Shue, the general counsel. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. "Mr. Coleman," Gerald said, stepping aside. "Come in." Andre walked into the room. It was the same setup as before. The long glass table, the leather chairs, the same executives seated around it, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed irritation. Richard Calloway sat near the far end, arms crossed, his expression sour. A few others Andre didn't recognize sat beside him, all dressed in expensive suits, all watching him like he was an exhibit in a museum. At the head of the table sat Isabella Sterling. She looked different in the daylight, sharper, more composed. She wore a black blazer and a crisp white blouse, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes calm but focused. When she saw Andre, she stood. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "thank you for coming." Andre nodded. "Ms. Sterling." Isabella gestured to an empty chair near her. "Please, sit." Andre walked over and sat down. The chair was more comfortable than anything he'd ever sat in at work. He set his hands on the table, trying to ignore the way everyone was staring at him. Isabella remained standing. She looked around the room, her expression unreadable. I called this meeting, she began, because I made a mistake. We all did. Richard Calloway shifted in his seat. Isabella, is this really necessary? Yes, Isabella said firmly. It is. She turned her attention back to the room. 2 nights ago, we were hours away from signing an acquisition agreement that would have destroyed this company. We didn't see it. Our legal team didn't see it. Our consultants didn't see it. But someone did. She looked at Andre. Andre Coleman, a man who works the night shift cleaning our floors. A man most of us have walked past 100 times without a second thought. He saw what we missed. And because he spoke up, he saved us from a catastrophe that would have cost us hundreds of millions of dollars and possibly this company's future. The room was silent. Isabella continued. I dismissed him. Some of you laughed at him. We treated him like he didn't matter. And we were wrong. Richard opened his mouth to say something, but Isabella cut him off with a look. I'm not saying this to embarrass anyone, she said. I'm saying it because it's the truth, and because if we're going to move forward, we need to be honest about what happened. She turned to Andre. Mr. Coleman, I want to publicly acknowledge what you did. You saved this company, and I'm grateful. Andre met her eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he nodded. Thank you. Isabella sat down. She folded her hands on the table and looked at Gerald. Where are we on the contract review? Gerald cleared his throat. We've been working through the night, Mr. Coleman was right. There are at least 8 major liability clauses buried in the document, most of them deliberately obscured by complex language. If we'd signed as written, we'd be looking at exposure in the range of $300 to $400 million, possibly more. Richard cursed under his breath. We've already sent a formal response to Reinhardt's legal team, Gerald continued. We've demanded a full renegotiation. They're not happy about it, but they're listening. Good, Isabella said. What else? Gerald hesitated. There's more. We dug deeper into Reinhardt's financials and found additional red flags. Environmental violations dating back 6 years, undisclosed pension obligations, a pending lawsuit from a former subsidiary that was never mentioned in the disclosures. Isabella's jaw tightened. How bad? Bad, Gerald said quietly. If we'd closed this deal, we'd be inheriting problems that could take a decade to unravel. The room erupted in murmurs. Andre sat quietly, listening. Isabella raised a hand and the room fell silent again. So we're pulling out, she said. It wasn't a question. I think we have to, Gerald said. Richard leaned forward. We've already invested 18 months into this? We're just going to walk away? We're going to walk away from a disaster, Isabella said sharply. And we're going to be grateful we saw it in time. She looked at Andre. Thanks to Mr. Coleman. Richard scowled but said nothing. Isabella stood again. I want a full post-mortem on this deal. I want to know how we missed this. I want to know why our legal team didn't catch what a janitor saw in 15 minutes. Gerald winced. We'll have a report ready by end of week. Good. Isabella's tone softened slightly. And I want to make sure this never happens again. She turned to Andre. Mr. Coleman, I offered you a position in our legal department. Do you accept? Andre took a breath. This was it. The moment he'd been thinking about all night. I do, he said. But I have a request. Isabella raised an eyebrow. Go on. I want you to create a program, Andre said. Something that gives people like me a chance. People who work in this building but never get noticed. Janitors, security guards, kitchen staff, maintenance workers. A lot of them have skills you don't know about. Degrees, experience, talent. But they're invisible because of the jobs they do. Isabella listened, her expression thoughtful. I want you to create a pathway, Andre continued. A way for them to be seen, to be given opportunities. Not charity, real opportunities. Richard scoffed. This is a corporation, not a charity case. We can't just hire people because they push a mop. Andre turned to him. I didn't ask you to hire people because they push a mop. I asked you to notice them, to give them a chance to show what they can do. That's all. Richard's face flushed, but he didn't respond. Isabella looked at Andre for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll do it, she said. We'll create a program. Internal talent development. Open to all staff, regardless of position. If people have skills we're not using, we'll find a way to use them. Andre felt something loosen in his chest. "Thank you," he said. Isabella extended her hand across the table. "Welcome to Sterling Global, Mr. Coleman. Officially." Andre stood and shook her hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze steady. "Thank you, Miss Sterling." As the meeting broke up, people filed out of the room, some congratulating Andre awkwardly, others avoiding his eyes entirely. Richard left without a word, his expression tight. Gerald stopped on his way out and shook Andre's hand. "We're lucky you were here," Gerald said quietly. "I mean that." Andre nodded. "Thank you." When the room finally emptied, Isabella remained. She gathered her papers slowly, then looked up at Andre. "You didn't have to ask for that program," she said. "You could have just taken the job and moved on." "I know," Andre said, "but I couldn't leave everyone else behind." Isabella smiled faintly. "You're a better person than most people in this building." Andre didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Isabella walked toward the door, then paused. "Your first day is Monday. HR will send you the details. Take the rest of the week to get things in order." "I will." She looked back at him one more time. "And Andre?" "Yes?" "Thank you for pushing back, for making me see." Then she was gone. Andre stood alone in the boardroom, the city stretching out beyond the windows. He felt like he'd just run a marathon, exhausted, relieved, and something else, hopeful. He left the building an hour later and took the bus home. When he walked into the apartment, Marcus was at the kitchen table drawing with crayons. "Dad, you're back!" Andre smiled. "I'm back." Marcus ran over and hugged him. "How was the meeting?" "It was good, buddy. Really good." "Are we going to be okay?" Andre knelt down and looked his son in the eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "We're going to be okay." That night, after Marcus was asleep, Andre sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and stared at the email from HR. It outlined his new position, his salary, his start date. Everything was real. Everything was happening. But the work wasn't over. Over the next 3 days, Andre buried himself in the contract documents Isabella had given him access to. She'd sent him everything: the original Reinhardt agreement, the financial disclosures, the environmental reports, the legal filings. It was hundreds of pages, dense and complicated, written in a mix of German and English that would have taken most people weeks to parse. Andre did it in 72 hours. He worked from home, sitting at the kitchen table while Marcus played nearby or watched cartoons. He made notes, highlighted sections, cross-referenced clauses. The deeper he dug, the worse it got. There were environmental violations that had been deliberately concealed. Toxic waste sites that Reinhardt had never disclosed. Pension funds that were underfunded by tens of millions. Labor disputes that had been settled quietly but left the company vulnerable to future claims. And then there were the offshore accounts. Andre found them buried in a footnote on page 87 of a supplemental financial disclosure. Accounts registered in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg, holding assets that weren't listed anywhere else in the documents. It didn't make sense, unless someone was hiding something. He spent an entire day tracing the accounts, following the threads, piecing together the puzzle. And when he finally understood what he was looking at, his blood ran cold. Reinhardt wasn't just hiding liabilities. They were hiding fraud. The company had been siphoning funds out of employee pension accounts and routing them through offshore subsidiaries. They'd covered it up with shell companies and complex financial instruments, but the trail was there if you knew where to look. And Andre knew where to look. He sat back in his chair staring at the screen. This wasn't just a bad deal anymore. This was criminal. He picked up his phone and called Isabella. She answered on the second ring. "Andre, what is it?" "We need to meet," he said. "Now." There was a pause. "What did you find?" "Not over the phone. I need to show you." "I'm at the office. Can you come in?" Andre glanced at the clock. It was almost 9 at night. Marcus was asleep. "Give me an hour," he said. He called his neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez, an older woman who sometimes watched Marcus when Andre worked nights. She agreed to come over, and within 20 minutes, Andre was on the bus downtown. The office was nearly empty when he arrived. Just a few lights on in the upper floors, the lobby dim and quiet. Miguel was at the security desk again. "Twice in 1 week?" Miguel said, grinning. "You moving up in the world, man." "Something like that," Andre said. He took the elevator to the 93rd floor and found Isabella in her office. She was sitting behind a massive desk, papers spread out in front of her, a cup of coffee steaming beside her laptop. She looked up when he walked in. "Show me," she said. Andre set his laptop on her desk and pulled up the files. For the next 45 minutes, he walked her through everything he'd found: the hidden accounts, the pension fraud, the offshore shell companies, the systematic theft that had been going on for years. Isabella's face grew darker with every page. When he finished, she sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. "This is worse than I thought," she said quietly. "It's criminal," Andre said. "If we'd acquired them, we'd be inheriting all of this. And when it came to light, we'd be the ones held responsible." Isabella closed her eyes. "How did our legal team miss this?" "They weren't looking for it," Andre said. "They were looking at the deal, not the company. And Reinhardt buried it deep." Isabella opened her eyes and looked at him. "Can you prove all of this?" "I already have," Andre said. He gestured to the laptop. "It's all documented. Every account, every transaction, every shell company. I can walk a prosecutor through it step by step." Isabella exhaled slowly. "Then we need to go to the authorities." "Agreed." She picked up her phone and made a call. Andre couldn't hear who was on the other end, but Isabella spoke quickly and quietly, her voice tight with controlled anger. When she hung up, she looked at Andre. "I just called our outside counsel. They're going to contact the SEC and the Justice Department first thing in the morning. We're going to cooperate fully. And we're going to make sure Reinhardt doesn't do this to anyone else." Andre nodded. "Good." Isabella stood and walked over to the window, staring out at the city. The lights glittered below, endless and cold. "You know what the worst part is?" she said softly. Andre waited. "We almost bought them," she continued. "We almost signed that contract. And if you hadn't been there that night," she trailed off, shaking her head, "we would have destroyed this company, and we wouldn't have even known why." Andre joined her at the window. "But you didn't sign it, and the company's still here." Isabella looked at him. "Because of you." Andre didn't know what to say to that, so he just stood there looking out at the city he'd lived in his whole life. The city where he'd built a career, lost everything, and now, somehow, found a way back. Isabella turned away from the window. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Monday morning. I want you there. I want you to present everything you found." Andre's stomach tightened. "In front of the board?" "Yes, they need to hear this from you. They need to understand what almost happened." Andre took a breath. "All right." Isabella smiled faintly. "You're going to do great. You've already proven that." They talked for a few more minutes, going over logistics, timelines, next steps. Then Andre gathered his things and headed home. The bus was nearly empty, just a few late-night workers and insomniacs scattered across the seats. Andre sat near the back and stared out the window, his mind racing. In 3 days, he'd gone from invisible to indispensable, from cleaning floors to saving $1 billion company. It didn't feel real, but it was. When he got home, Mrs. Ramirez was dozing on the couch. Andre thanked her quietly and walked her to the door. Then he checked on Marcus, who was fast asleep, his small chest rising and falling in the dim light. Andre stood there for a long time, just watching him. This was what it was all for. Everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd endured. It was for moments like this, for the chance to give his son a life that was better, safer, full of possibility. And now, for the first time in years, that future felt real. Andre went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He sat down at the table and opened his laptop one more time, reviewing the documents, making sure everything was airtight. He worked until almost 3 in the morning, double-checking every detail, every reference, every footnote. When he finally closed the laptop, his eyes were burning and his head was pounding. But he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like himself again. The weekend passed in a blur. Andre spent Saturday with Marcus, taking him to the park, playing basketball, making lunch together. It was the first time in months he'd had a full day off, and he soaked in every moment of it. Marcus seemed happier, lighter, like he could sense that something had changed. On Sunday, Andre prepared for the board meeting. He rehearsed his presentation, organized his notes, made sure he could explain everything clearly and confidently. He wanted to be perfect, not for himself, but for everyone who'd been overlooked the way he had. For Miguel at the security desk. For the woman who cleaned the break room every morning. For all the invisible people who kept the building running while the executives walked past without a glance. This was for them. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Andre dressed in his suit again, this time with a new tie he'd bought over the weekend. Marcus watched him from the doorway, grinning. "You look like a superhero, Dad," Andre laughed. "I don't know about that." "You do. You look strong." Andre knelt down and pulled his son into a hug. "I love you, buddy." "Love you too." Andre arrived at Sterling Global at 8:30. This time, when he walked through the lobby, Miguel stood up and saluted. "Good luck, man. Knock 'em dead." Andre grinned. "Thanks, Miguel." He took the elevator to the top floor, higher than he'd ever been in the building. The boardroom here was even bigger than the one on 93. Dark wood, leather chairs, a table that looked like it cost more than Andre's entire apartment. The board members were already seated. 10 men and women, all older, all dressed in impeccable suits, all watching him with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. Isabella sat at the head of the table, composed and focused. She gestured to an empty seat near her. "Mr. Coleman, please." Andre sat down. His heart was racing, but his hands were steady. Isabella stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on short notice. I've called this meeting because we've uncovered something that could have ended this company, and the man who discovered it is here to explain." She looked at Andre. "Mr. Coleman." Andre stood. He took a breath, and then he began. He walked them through everything: the contract, the hidden clauses, the environmental violations, the pension fraud, the offshore accounts. He showed them documents, explained the legal mechanisms, outlined the criminal exposure. By the time he finished, the room was dead silent. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair, leaned forward. "How much are we talking about?" he asked quietly. "In total liability?" Andre said. "Close to $500 million. Maybe more." Someone swore. Another board member, a woman in her 60s, looked at Isabella. "And we were going to sign this?" Isabella nodded. "We were, until Mr. Coleman stopped us." The room erupted in murmurs. Andre sat down, his pulse pounding in his ears. The silver-haired man looked at Andre. "You did all this in 3 days?" "Yes, sir." "By yourself?" "Yes, sir." The man sat back, shaking his head in disbelief. "Remarkable." Isabella stood again. "I'm recommending we terminate all negotiations with Reinhardt immediately. I'm also recommending we cooperate fully with federal authorities to investigate the fraud Mr. Coleman uncovered." The board members looked at each other. Then one by one they nodded. "Agreed," the silver-haired man said. "And Ms. Sterling?" "Yes?" "Make sure Mr. Coleman is taken care of. We owe him everything." Isabella smiled. "Already done." The meeting adjourned shortly after. As people filed out, several board members stopped to shake Andre's hand, to thank him, to tell him how impressed they were. It felt surreal, like he was living someone else's life. When the room finally cleared, Isabella walked over to him. "You did it," she said. Andre exhaled. "We did it!" Isabella shook her head. "No, you did it. Don't diminish that." Andre smiled faintly. "Thank you." "Come on," Isabella said. "Let's get you settled into your new office." She led him down the hall to a corner office with windows overlooking the city. It was smaller than hers, but it was still bigger than any space Andre had ever worked in. There was a desk, a computer, bookshelves, even a coffee maker. "This is yours," Isabella said. Andre stood in the doorway, staring. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep doing what you've been doing," Isabella said. "We need people like you here, people who see what others miss." Andre nodded. "I will." Isabella left him to settle in, and Andre stood alone in his new office, looking out at the city. He thought about the nights he'd spent mopping these floors, the mornings he'd taken the bus home, exhausted and invisible. That life wasn't gone. It was still part of him. But now, standing here, he realized something. He'd never really been invisible. He'd just been waiting for someone to look. Andre spent the first hour in his new office, just sitting at the desk, trying to absorb the reality of it all. The chair was leather, soft, and supportive in a way that made him realize how much his back had hurt after years of standing and bending over mop buckets. The computer screen was massive, the keyboard pristine. There were pens in a holder, a notepad with the Sterling Global logo embossed in silver, and a phone with more buttons than he knew what to do with. He picked up the phone and stared at it for a moment, then set it back down. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Gerald Shue, carrying a thick stack of folders. "Got a minute?" Gerald asked. "Of course, come in." Gerald stepped inside and set the folders on Andre's desk with a heavy thud. "Welcome to the legal department. This is about a tenth of what we're dealing with right now." Andre looked at the stack. "All related to Reinhardt?" "Most of it. We're working with federal investigators now, and they want everything documented. Every clause, every transaction, every shell company you identified. It's going to be a long process." Andre nodded. "I'm ready." Gerald studied him for a moment. "You know, I've been practicing law for 23 years. I've worked with some of the best legal minds in the country, but I've never seen anyone dissect a contract the way you did. How did you learn to do that?" Andre leaned back in his chair. "Practice. Repetition. And a lot of mistakes early on. When I was starting out as a translator, I worked on a deal where I missed a clause. It was small, buried deep in the language, but it ended up costing my client millions. I swore I'd never let that happen again. So I learned to read every word, every comma, every footnote. I learned to assume that if something could be hidden, it probably was." Gerald nodded slowly. "Well, that skill just saved this company, and probably a lot of people's jobs. I'm glad I could help." Gerald hesitated, then said, "I owe you an apology. That night in the boardroom when you first spoke up, I didn't take you seriously. I should have." Andre met his eyes. "You weren't the only one." "I know, but that doesn't make it right." Gerald extended his hand. "I'm glad you're here now. We need people who aren't afraid to speak up." Andre shook his hand. "Thank you." After Gerald left, Andre opened the first folder and began reading. The documents were dense, technical, filled with the kind of language that would have put most people to sleep. But Andre felt a familiar rhythm settle over him. This was what he was good at. This was what he'd trained for years to do. He worked through lunch, barely noticing the time. At some point, someone from HR stopped by to drop off his benefits paperwork and employee handbook. He signed what needed signing and kept working. By the time he looked up again, it was almost 4 in the afternoon. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus's school. Reminder, parent-teacher conference tomorrow at 3 p.m. Andre's stomach dropped. He'd completely forgotten. He pulled up his calendar and stared at the empty screen. Tomorrow, 3 in the afternoon. He was supposed to be here at work, doing the job he'd just started. He picked up the office phone and dialed HR. A woman answered on the second ring. "Human Resources, this is Denise." "Hi, this is Andre Coleman. I just started today in legal." "Oh, Mr. Coleman, congratulations. What can I help you with?" "I have a parent-teacher conference tomorrow at 3. My son's school. I know I just started, but is there any way I could leave early?" There was a pause. "Let me check the policy. Can you hold for just a moment?" Of course, soft music played in his ear. Andre drummed his fingers on the desk, anxiety building in his chest. He couldn't miss this. Marcus's teacher had been asking to meet for weeks, and Andre had already rescheduled twice because of his night shifts. Denise came back on the line. "Mr. Coleman, you're actually entitled to flexible hours during your first 90 days. As long as you communicate with your supervisor and make up the time, you should be fine. Have you talked to Ms. Sterling?" "Not yet. I'd recommend sending her an email, but I don't think it'll be a problem." Andre exhaled. "Thank you." He hung up and immediately drafted an email to Isabella, explaining the situation and asking if he could leave at 2:30 the next day. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The reply came 5 minutes later. "Of course. Family comes first. Let me know how it goes." Isabella Andre stared at the message, relief washing over him. He'd spent 3 years working jobs where asking for time off felt like begging for mercy, where every request was met with suspicion or annoyance. This was different. This felt human. He worked for another 2 hours, then packed up his things and headed home. The bus ride felt strange now. He was still taking the same route, sitting in the same seats, but everything felt different. He wasn't heading home from a shift. He was heading home from work, real work, work that mattered. When he walked into the apartment, Marcus was at the kitchen table doing homework. He looked up and grinned. "Dad, you're home early." "I know. I wanted to see you." Marcus jumped up and ran over, wrapping his arms around Andre's waist. "How was your first day?" "It was good, buddy. Really good." They made dinner together, spaghetti with jarred sauce and garlic bread. Marcus chattered about school, about his friend Devin, about the science project they were working on. Andre listened, soaking in every word, feeling a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. After dinner, they sat on the couch and watched cartoons. Marcus curled up against Andre's side, his small body warm and solid. Andre rested his hand on his son's head, running his fingers through his hair. "Dad?" Marcus said quietly. "Yeah, buddy?" "Are you happy?" Andre's throat tightened. "Yeah, I am. Are you?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, you're home more now." Andre kissed the top of his head. "I'm going to be home a lot more, I promise." The next day, Andre left work at 2:30 and took the bus across town to Marcus's school. It was a small elementary school, old but well-maintained, with bright murals painted on the walls and a playground out front. Andre signed in at the office and made his way to Marcus's classroom. Mrs. Kapoor, Marcus's teacher, was a kind woman in her 50s with graying hair and warm eyes. She stood when Andre entered and shook his hand. "Mr. Coleman, thank you so much for coming." "Of course. Sorry it took so long to schedule." "I understand. You're busy." She gestured to a small chair across from her desk. "Please sit." Andre sat down, feeling too large for the child-sized furniture. Mrs. Kapoor pulled out a folder and opened it. "I wanted to talk to you about Marcus," she began. "He's a wonderful student, very bright, very curious. But I've noticed he's been struggling a bit lately." Andre's chest tightened. "Struggling how?" "Emotionally. He's been quieter than usual. A few times I've caught him staring out the window during lessons. And last week, he got into an argument with another student during recess." Andre frowned. "What was the argument about?" Mrs. Kapoor hesitated. "The other student said something about Marcus's clothes, that they were old. Marcus got upset and pushed him." Andre closed his eyes. He knew Marcus's clothes were worn. He'd been meaning to buy new ones, but money had been tight, and he kept putting it off. "I'm sorry," Andre said quietly. "I didn't know." "It's okay," Mrs. Kapoor said gently. "Kids can be cruel, but I wanted to bring it to your attention because I think Marcus is dealing with some big feelings right now. He's mentioned that you work a lot, that he doesn't see you as much as he'd like." Andre's heart sank. "I've been working nights, trying to make ends meet." "I understand. And I'm not judging you, Mr. Coleman. I just want to make sure Marcus has the support he needs. He's a good kid. He just needs to know he's not alone." Andre nodded, his throat tight. "I'll talk to him, and I'll make sure he knows I'm here." Mrs. Kapoor smiled. "That's all he needs, just knowing you're there." They talked for a few more minutes, going over Marcus's grades and upcoming projects. Then Andre thanked her and left. He walked slowly back to the bus stop, his mind churning. He'd been so focused on providing for Marcus, on making sure they had food and shelter and stability, that he hadn't stopped to think about what Marcus really needed. He needed his dad, not just present, but there, really there. When Andre got home, Marcus was at the neighbor's apartment, playing with Mrs. Ramirez's grandson. Andre picked him up, and they walked home together. Marcus was quiet, his hand small in Andre's. "Hey, buddy," Andre said as they stepped inside. "Can we talk for a minute?" Marcus looked up at him, eyes wide. "Am I in trouble?" "No, not at all. I just want to check in with you." They sat on the couch together. Andre turned to face his son, taking his hands. "I talked to Mrs. Kapoor today," Andre said gently. "She told me you've been having a hard time." Marcus looked down. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be sorry. I just want to know what's going on. How are you feeling?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I miss you." Andre's chest tightened. "I'm right here, buddy. I know, but you're always working, and when you're home, you're tired." Andre felt like he'd been punched. I'm sorry. I've been trying to take care of us, to make sure we're okay. I know, Marcus said, his voice small. But I just want you. Andre pulled his son into a hug, holding him tight. I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Things are going to be different, I promise. Marcus sniffled against his chest. Okay. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other. When Marcus finally pulled back, his eyes were red, but he was smiling. Can we play a game? Marcus asked. Andre smiled. Yeah, let's play. They spent the rest of the evening playing board games and watching movies. Andre didn't check his phone once, didn't think about work or contracts or anything else. He just focused on his son, on being present, on making up for all the time he'd missed. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Andre threw himself into his new role, working closely with Gerald and the rest of the legal team to document everything related to the Reinhardt case. Federal investigators came and went, asking questions, reviewing documents, building their case. Andre walked them through every detail, every hidden clause, every fraudulent transaction. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Reinhardt had been running the pension fraud for almost a decade, siphoning off millions of dollars and hiding it in offshore accounts. They'd falsified environmental reports, bribed local officials, and systematically exploited their workers. It was a sprawling web of corruption, and Andre was at the center of unraveling it. But he made sure to keep his promise to Marcus. He left work at 5 every day. He made breakfast every morning. He helped with homework, went to school events, and was there for bedtime every single night. It was exhausting, balancing everything, but Andre had never felt more alive. Isabella noticed. One afternoon, she stopped by his office and leaned against the doorframe. You're doing good work, Andre. He looked up from his computer. Thank you. I mean it. The investigators told me you've been invaluable. They said without your analysis, this case would have taken months longer to build. Andre smiled faintly. Just doing my job. Isabella stepped inside and closed the door. I wanted to talk to you about something. The board has been discussing the talent development program you proposed, the one for overlooked employees. Andre sat up straighter. And they've approved it. We're calling it the Internal Opportunity Initiative. It's going to be a formal program where any employee, regardless of position, can apply for skills assessments and job training. If they have talents we're not using, we'll find a way to use them. Andre felt a surge of emotion. That's incredible. We want you to help oversee it, Isabella continued. Work with HR to develop the framework, identify candidates, mentor people through the process. It's a lot of responsibility on top of your current work, but I think you're the right person for it. Andre didn't hesitate. I'll do it. Isabella smiled. I thought you might say that. Over the next month, Andre worked with HR to build the program from the ground up. They created application forms, assessment protocols, mentorship structures. They reached out to employees across every department, from custodial staff to security to food services, letting them know about the opportunity. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, they had over 60 applications. A security guard with a degree in computer science, a cafeteria worker who spoke 5 languages, a maintenance technician with an MBA. People who'd been invisible for years, suddenly stepping into the light. Andre reviewed every application personally. He met with candidates, talked to them about their skills, their dreams, their barriers, and he worked tirelessly to match them with opportunities inside the company. One of the first people he helped was Miguel, the security guard who'd been so kind to him. Miguel had a background in logistics and supply chain management, but he'd never been able to break into the field. Andre connected him with the operations team, and within a month, Miguel had a new position coordinating shipments and inventory. Man, I can't thank you enough, Miguel said when they ran into each other in the lobby. You changed my life. Andre shook his head. You changed your own life. I just opened the door. As the program grew, so did Andre's reputation inside the company. People started coming to him with problems, questions, ideas. He became known as someone who listened, who cared, who saw people for who they really were. But not everyone was happy about it. Richard Calloway, the CFO, had been skeptical of the program from the start. He saw it as a waste of resources, a distraction from the company's core mission, and as the program expanded, his resentment grew. One afternoon, Andre was called into a meeting with Isabella and Richard. The moment he walked into Isabella's office, he could feel the tension. Richard was sitting across from Isabella's desk, arms crossed, his expression sour. Isabella looked tired but composed. "Andre, thanks for coming," Isabella said. "Richard has some concerns about the Internal Opportunity Initiative." Andre sat down. "What kind of concerns?" Richard leaned forward. "The kind where we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a program that hasn't shown any measurable ROI. We're training janitors to be analysts, security guards to be managers. Where's the return on investment?" Andre kept his voice calm. "The return is in employee retention, morale, and productivity. We're identifying talent we already have instead of spending millions on outside recruiting. We're building loyalty and reducing turnover. That has value." "Does it?" Richard shot back. "Or are we just wasting money on people who should be grateful to have jobs at all?" Andre felt his jaw tighten. These people aren't charity cases. They're skilled professionals who've been overlooked because of the positions they hold. We're not doing them a favor. We're doing ourselves a favor by using their talents. Richard scoffed. "That's a nice speech, but the numbers don't lie. This program is costing us money, and we're not seeing results." It's been 6 weeks, Andre said sharply. "You can't measure the success of a talent development program in 6 weeks. "Then when can we measure it?" Richard demanded. "A year? 5 years? When does this stop being a pet project and start being a business decision?" Isabella held up a hand. "Richard, I understand your concerns, but I believe in this program, and the board approved it." "The board approved it because you sold them on a feel-good story," Richard said. "But when the quarterly numbers come in and we're down because we're spending money on this, they're going to ask questions, and I'm going to have answers." He stood and walked out without another word. Andre sat in the silence that followed, his heart pounding. Isabella sighed. "I'm sorry about that." "He's not wrong," Andre said quietly. "The program is expensive, and we haven't seen measurable results yet." "But we will," Isabella said firmly. "I believe in this, Andre. I believe in you. Don't let Richard get in your head." Andre nodded, but the doubt had already taken root. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Richard's words echoing in his mind. What if the program failed? What if he'd pushed for something that ended up hurting the company instead of helping it? What if he was wrong? The next morning, Andre was exhausted. He dragged himself to work and threw himself into the Reinhardt case, trying to distract himself from the anxiety gnawing at him. But it was hard to focus. Every time his phone buzzed, he half expected it to be Isabella telling him the program was being shut down. Around noon, Gerald stopped by his office. "You look like hell," Gerald said bluntly. "Thanks." Gerald sat down. "What's going on?" Andre hesitated, then told him about the meeting with Richard, about the concerns over cost and ROI, about the fear that the program was going to fail. Gerald listened, then leaned back in his chair. "You know what Richard's problem is?" "What?" "He's scared." Andre frowned. "Scared of what?" "Scared that you're right. Scared that the old way of doing things is broken. Scared that if this program succeeds, it'll prove that he's been wrong for the last 20 years. Andre hadn't thought of it that way. "People like Richard," Gerald continued, "they've built their entire careers on a certain set of assumptions. That talent comes from the right schools, the right backgrounds, the right pedigree. You're challenging that, and that terrifies him." "So what do I do?" Gerald smiled. "You keep going. You prove him wrong, not with words, with results." Andre nodded slowly. "Okay. And for what it's worth," Gerald added, "I think you're doing something important here. Don't let Richard take that away from you." Over the next 2 months, Andre doubled down on the program. He worked longer hours, met with more candidates, pushed harder to find opportunities for people, and slowly, the results started to show. A former janitor named Patricia joined the finance team and identified a billing error that saved the company over $200,000. A security guard named James moved into IT and streamlined the company's server infrastructure, reducing costs by 15%. A cafeteria worker named Lena started working in customer service and became one of the highest-rated representatives in the department. The success stories piled up, and people noticed. One afternoon, Andre was called into another meeting with Isabella. But this time, Richard wasn't there. Instead, it was just Isabella and the silver-haired board member Andre had met months ago. His name was William Cross, and he was the longest-serving member of Sterling Global's board. "Mr. Coleman," William said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you again." Andre shook his hand. "You too, sir." "I wanted to talk to you about the Internal Opportunity Initiative," William said, sitting down. "I've been reviewing the numbers, and I have to say, I'm impressed." Andre blinked. "You are?" "Very much so. In just 3 months, the program has identified 12 employees who've moved into new roles. Those employees have collectively contributed over $500,000 in cost savings and revenue generation. That's a 1,400% return on investment." Andre felt his chest loosen. "I didn't realize the numbers were that strong." "They are," William said. "And more importantly, employee satisfaction is up. Turnover is down. People feel valued. That's worth more than any spreadsheet can measure." Isabella smiled. "I told you it would work." Andre let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Thank you. Both of you." William stood. "Keep doing what you're doing, Mr. Coleman. This company is better because of you." After William left, Isabella looked at Andre. "You did it," she said. Andre shook his head. "We did it." "No," Isabella said firmly. "You did it. You saw something no one else saw, and you fought for it. That takes courage." Andre didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. That evening, he left work feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He picked up Marcus from school, and they stopped at the grocery store on the way home. For the first time in years, Andre didn't have to check the prices before putting things in the cart. He let Marcus pick out snacks, cereal, juice boxes. They filled the cart with fresh vegetables, good cuts of meat, things Andre had always wanted to buy but couldn't afford. At the checkout, Marcus looked up at him with wide eyes. "Dad, are we rich now?" Andre laughed. "No, buddy, we're not rich, but we're okay. We're more than okay." Marcus grinned. "Cool." When they got home, Andre made dinner while Marcus did homework at the kitchen table. They ate together, talking about their days, laughing at Marcus's stories about school. After dinner, they played video games, and then Andre read to Marcus until he fell asleep. Andre stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching his son sleep, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. They'd made it. Through all the struggle, all the pain, all the uncertainty, they'd made it to the other side. And for the first time in years, Andre let himself believe that everything was going to be okay. The following Monday morning, Andre arrived at work to find an email from the Justice Department waiting in his inbox. The subject line read simply, "Reinhardt investigation. Update required." He opened it and scanned the contents. Federal prosecutors wanted to schedule a meeting. They needed Andre to walk them through additional documents they'd uncovered during their investigation, documents that appeared to connect Reinhardt's fraud to a network of shell companies across 3 countries. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday at 10 in the morning at the federal building downtown. Andre forwarded the email to Gerald and Isabella, then spent the next 2 days preparing. He reviewed every document he'd analyzed over the past months, cross-referenced transactions, mapped out the corporate structures. By Tuesday night, he had a presentation ready that laid out the entire scheme in clear, undeniable detail. Wednesday morning came cold and wet, rain drumming against the windows of the bus as Andre rode downtown. He wore his best suit, the one he'd bought after his first paycheck from Sterling Global, and carried a leather briefcase Gerald had given him as a congratulations gift. Inside were printed copies of every relevant document, organized by date and transaction type. The federal building was imposing, all concrete and glass, with security checkpoints and metal detectors at every entrance. Andre went through the screening process and was escorted to a conference room on the 8th floor. Gerald and Isabella were already there, along with 3 people Andre didn't recognize. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Sarah Chen, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She stood when Andre entered and extended her hand. "Mr. Coleman, thank you for coming." "Of course," Sarah gestured to the 2 men beside her. "This is Agent Marcus Torres from the FBI, and this is Peter Hoffman from the SEC. We've all been reviewing the materials you provided, and we have some questions. They sat down around a long table. Sarah pulled out a thick folder and opened it. We've been able to trace the offshore accounts you identified back to a parent company registered in Luxembourg. But there's a gap in the timeline. Between 2019 and 2021, approximately $40 million moved through these accounts, but we can't figure out where it went. The trail goes cold. Andre pulled out his laptop and opened one of his analysis files. I saw that too. It took me a while to figure out, but I think I know where it went. He turned the screen so everyone could see. Reinhardt created a series of holding companies in the British Virgin Islands. On paper, they looked like separate entities, but if you look at the registration dates and the corporate officers, you'll see they're all connected. The $40 million was split across 7 different accounts, then moved again through a series of what looked like legitimate business transactions, equipment purchases, consulting fees, service contracts, but none of those transactions were real. Agent Torres leaned forward. How do you know? Because the companies they were paying don't exist. I ran searches on every vendor listed in the transaction records. Most of them have no web presence, no business registrations, no physical addresses. They're ghosts. The money was moving in circles, getting laundered through fake transactions, then funneled back to accounts controlled by Reinhardt's executives. Sarah and Peter exchanged a look. Can you prove that? Sarah asked. I already have. Andre pulled out a printed document and slid it across the table. This is a corporate registry search I ran last week. Every one of these so-called vendors is registered to the same address in the BVI, and that address is a law firm that specializes in offshore asset protection. Peter picked up the document and scanned it, his eyes widening. This is exactly what we needed. They spent the next 3 hours going through every detail, every transaction, every connection Andre had uncovered. Sarah took notes furiously, asking sharp, probing questions. Agent Torres recorded everything. Peter nodded along, occasionally interjecting with questions about specific financial instruments. By the time they finished, it was past 1 in the afternoon. Sarah closed her folder and sat back. Mr. Coleman, I've been a prosecutor for 12 years. I've worked on some of the most complex financial fraud cases in the country. And I've never seen anyone outside of law enforcement do analysis like this. You've essentially built our entire case for us. Andre felt a flush of pride, but kept his expression neutral. I just followed the money. You did a lot more than that, Agent Torres said. You connected dots that took our team of forensic accountants weeks to even find. If this goes to trial, we're going to need you to testify. Andre's stomach tightened. Testify? As an expert witness, Sarah clarified, you'd walk the jury through exactly what you've shown us today. Explain how the fraud worked, how the money moved, why it matters. Your testimony could make or break this case. Andre looked at Isabella. She gave him a small, encouraging nod. Okay, Andre said. I'll do it. Sarah smiled. Good. We'll be in touch. They wrapped up the meeting and Andre, Gerald, and Isabella left the federal building together. The rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, none of them speaking. Finally, Gerald said, You know you're probably going to end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, right? Andre blinked. What? This case is going to be huge, Gerald continued. Multinational fraud, offshore shell companies, corporate corruption, and you're at the center of it. Once this goes public, everyone's going to want to know who you are. Andre hadn't thought about that. The idea of being in the spotlight, of having his name and face plastered across news outlets, made his skin crawl. Isabella must have seen the look on his face, because she said gently, We'll protect your privacy as much as we can, but Gerald's right. This is going to be a big story. Andre took a breath. I didn't do this for attention. I just wanted to stop bad people from getting away with something terrible. I know, Isabella said, but that doesn't mean the attention won't come anyway. Over the next few weeks, Andre tried to focus on his work and ignore the growing media interest in the Reinhardt case. News outlets had started reporting on the investigation, though details were still scarce. Federal prosecutors had filed charges against 4 Reinhardt executives, including the CEO and CFO, and the company itself was facing potential dissolution. Every article mentioned that the fraud had been uncovered by an analyst at Sterling Global, but so far, Andre's name hadn't been released. That changed on a Thursday morning in late October. Andre was at his desk reviewing a new contract when his phone started buzzing non-stop. Text messages, emails, calls from numbers he didn't recognize. He picked up the phone and saw a notification from a news app. Sterling Global analyst exposes billion-dollar fraud. The janitor who became a hero. His heart sank. He clicked on the article and saw his name in the headline. Worse, there was a photo. A professional headshot Sterling Global's PR team had taken a few weeks earlier for an internal directory. The article detailed his background, his career as a translator, his years working as a janitor, and his role in exposing the Reinhardt fraud. Within an hour, the story had been picked up by every major news outlet. The Wall Street Journal ran a profile. CNN did a segment. Social media exploded with reactions, some praising him, others questioning how a janitor could possibly have the skills to uncover something trained lawyers had missed. Andre sat at his desk, staring at his phone, feeling like the walls were closing in. Isabella appeared in his doorway. I just saw the news. Are you okay? Andre looked up at her. I don't know. She stepped inside and closed the door. Our PR team is fielding calls from every outlet in the country. They all want interviews. They want to know your story. I don't want to do interviews. You don't have to, Isabella said. We can handle this. We'll issue a statement saying you're focused on your work and have no comment. But Andre, you need to be prepared. This isn't going away. You're a public figure now. Andre put his head in his hands. I just wanted to do my job. I know, but what you did was extraordinary. People are going to want to know about you. That's not a bad thing. It feels like a bad thing. Isabella sat down across from him. Let me ask you something. Why did you agree to testify? Andre looked up. Because it was the right thing to do. Exactly, and this is part of that. People need to know that regular people can make a difference. That you don't have to come from money or power to change the world. Your story matters, Andre, whether you want it to or not. Andre was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing and it hurts the case? You won't, Isabella said firmly. You're one of the most careful, thoughtful people I've ever met. Trust yourself. Andre nodded slowly. Okay. Okay, Isabella echoed. She stood and walked to the door, then paused. And Andre, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not because of the headlines, because you had the courage to speak up when no one else would. After she left, Andre sat alone in his office, listening to his phone continue to buzz with notifications. He thought about Marcus, about how this attention might affect him, about whether kids at school would start treating him differently. He thought about the people he used to work with on the night shift, wondering if they were reading the articles, if they were surprised or proud or resentful. Then he thought about the executives at Reinhardt who'd stolen millions from their workers' pension funds, who'd poisoned communities and lied about it, who thought they were untouchable. And he realized Isabella was right. His story did matter. Not because it made him special, but because it proved that anyone could stand up to power. Anyone could make a difference. He picked up his phone and texted Marcus's school, asking if everything was okay. The principal responded within minutes. Marcus is doing great. Some kids asked him about the news, and he told them his dad is a superhero. He's very proud of you. Andre felt tears prick his eyes. He wiped them away and got back to work. That evening, when Andre picked Marcus up from school, his son was practically bouncing with excitement. Dad, everyone saw the news. They all know you stopped the bad guys. Andre knelt down. It wasn't just me, buddy. A lot of people worked on this. But you're the one who figured it out first. Mrs. Kapoor said you're a hero. Andre smiled. I'm just a guy who did his job. Marcus threw his arms around his neck. You're my hero. Andre held him tight, feeling the weight of the day lift just slightly. This was what mattered. Not the headlines or the interviews or the attention, just this. His son, proud and happy and safe. They went home and made dinner together. Marcus talked nonstop about his day, about how his friends thought it was cool that his dad was on TV, about how Devin's mom said Andre should run for mayor. Andre listened and laughed and tried to let himself enjoy the moment. After Marcus went to bed, Andre sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened his laptop. He had an email from Sarah Chen, the federal prosecutor. Mr. Coleman, I wanted to give you a heads up. Reinhardt's legal team has filed a motion to dismiss the charges, claiming insufficient evidence. We're confident we can beat it, but it means the trial is likely going to be pushed back to early next year. I'll keep you updated. Thank you again for everything you've done. Sarah Andre read the email twice, then closed the laptop. He'd known this wasn't over. Cases like this took years to resolve, especially when the defendants had money and expensive lawyers. But knowing that didn't make it any less exhausting. He thought about the people whose pensions had been stolen, the workers who'd been lied to, the communities that had been poisoned. They deserved justice, and Andre was going to make sure they got it, no matter how long it took. The next few months were a whirlwind. The media attention gradually faded as other stories took over the news cycle, but the work continued. Andre spent countless hours preparing for trial, working with prosecutors, reviewing documents, and refining his testimony. The Internal Opportunity Initiative continued to grow, with more employees coming forward and more success stories emerging. Patricia from Finance got promoted to Senior Analyst. James from IT became a team lead. Lena from Customer Service was being considered for a management position. Andre also started getting calls from other companies, asking if he'd consult on their talent development programs, or help them review contracts or speak at conferences about his experience. He turned most of them down, preferring to focus on his work at Sterling Global and his time with Marcus. But he did accept a few speaking engagements, mostly at community colleges and workforce development programs, places where his story might actually inspire people who needed to hear it. One evening in December, Andre was invited to speak at a local community center in the neighborhood where he'd grown up. The room was packed, mostly with people who looked like him, people who were working hard just to get by, people who'd been overlooked and underestimated their whole lives. Andre stood at the podium and looked out at the crowd. He thought about the speech he'd prepared, the polished talking points about perseverance and opportunity. Then he set his notes aside. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that hard work always pays off, he began, because that's not true. A lot of you work harder than I ever have, and you're still struggling. That's not your fault. That's a system that's broken. People nodded. A few murmured in agreement. But I will tell you this, Andre continued. Your worth is not determined by your job title. It's not determined by how much money you make or where you went to school. You are valuable because of who you are, what you know, and what you can do. And if the world doesn't see that, it's the world that's wrong, not you. The room was silent, everyone listening. I spent 3 years pushing a mop, Andre said. And I was good at it. I took pride in it. But I also knew I was capable of more. And I carried that knowledge with me every single day, even when no one else saw it. That's what I want you to remember. Your potential doesn't disappear just because other people can't see it. It's still there. And when the opportunity comes, when someone finally gives you a chance, you'll be ready. He paused, looking out at the faces in front of him. But here's the other thing. You don't have to wait for someone to give you a chance. You can create your own opportunities. You can speak up. You can push back. You can demand to be seen, because you deserve to be seen, all of you. The room erupted in applause. Andre stepped back from the podium, his heart pounding, and for the first time in months, he felt like he'd said something that actually mattered. After the event, people came up to him one by one, shaking his hand, thanking him, telling him their stories. A woman who'd been working as a housekeeper for 15 years but had a degree in accounting. A man who'd been driving a delivery truck but had a background in engineering. A young woman who'd been cleaning offices but was studying computer programming at night. Andre listened to all of them, gave them his contact information, promised to help however he could. By the time he left the community center, it was almost 10 at night and he was exhausted. But it was a good kind of exhausted, the kind that came from doing something meaningful. As the new year approached, the trial date was finally set for February. Andre spent his holidays preparing, going over his testimony with Sarah and her team, making sure every detail was perfect. Marcus was excited about the trial, asking questions about courtrooms and judges, and what it would be like when his dad testified. Will you wear a suit? Marcus asked one evening. Yes, buddy. Will you be nervous? Andre thought about that. Probably, but I'll be okay. Because you're brave. Andre smiled. No, because I know I'm telling the truth, and the truth is powerful. Marcus seemed satisfied with that answer. He went back to his homework, and Andre went back to reviewing his notes. On the morning of the trial, Andre woke up before dawn. He couldn't sleep, his mind racing through everything he needed to say, everything he needed to remember. He got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table in the dark, going over his testimony one more time. By the time Marcus woke up, Andre was already dressed in his suit, his briefcase packed and ready. "You look important, Dad," Marcus said, rubbing his eyes. "Thanks, buddy." "Are you going to win?" Andre knelt down. "I'm going to tell the truth, and that's all I can do." Marcus hugged him tight. "Good luck." The courthouse was downtown, a massive stone building with tall columns and wide steps leading up to the entrance. Andre met Isabella, Gerald, and the prosecution team outside. Sarah greeted him with a firm handshake. "Ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." They went inside and through security, then made their way to the courtroom. It was larger than Andre had expected, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. Rows of benches filled the gallery, already packed with reporters, spectators, and people whose lives had been affected by Reinhardt's fraud. At the defense table sat the 4 executives, all in expensive suits, flanked by a small army of lawyers. They looked calm, confident, like they'd been through this before and knew how to win. Andre took his seat in the gallery next to Isabella and waited. The judge entered, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, and the trial began. Opening statements were made, witnesses were called, evidence was presented. It was slow, methodical, exhausting. Finally, on the 3rd day, Sarah called Andre to the stand. He walked to the front of the courtroom, his heart pounding, and placed his hand on the Bible as the bailiff swore him in. Then he sat down and looked out at the room. The jury, the judge, the defendants, the gallery. Sarah approached. "Mr. Coleman, can you please state your occupation for the record?" "I'm a legal analyst at Sterling Global. And before that, I worked as a janitor." A few people in the gallery murmured. The defense attorneys exchanged glances. Sarah walked him through his background, his education, his experience as a translator, his years working night shifts. Then she moved to the contract. "Mr. Coleman, can you explain how you first became aware of the Reinhardt acquisition agreement?" Andre took a breath and began. He told the story exactly as it had happened. The boardroom. The executives. The moment he read the contract and saw what everyone else had missed. He explained the hidden clauses, the liability transfers, the environmental violations. And then he walked the jury through the fraud itself, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the $40 million that had disappeared and reappeared in a carefully orchestrated web of deceit. He spoke clearly, calmly, without hesitation. He answered every question Sarah asked, explained every document she showed him, broke down every transaction into simple, understandable terms. The jury listened, rapt. The judge took notes. The defendants looked increasingly uncomfortable. When Sarah finished, the defense attorney stood for cross-examination. He was older, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Andre made in a month. He approached the stand with a smug expression. "Mr. Coleman, you've presented a very compelling narrative. But let me ask you this. You're not a licensed attorney, are you?" "No, I'm not." "And you're not a certified accountant?" "No." "So you have no formal credentials in law or finance, correct?" Andre met his eyes. "That's correct." The defense attorney smiled. "Then how can you expect this jury to trust your interpretation of complex legal and financial documents when you lack the expertise to properly analyze them?" Andre didn't flinch. "Because I spent 5 years translating legal documents for some of the largest firms in the world. Because I've analyzed hundreds of contracts in multiple languages. And because the documents speak for themselves. The fraud is right there in black and white. You don't need a law degree to see it. You just need to look." The defense attorney's smile faded. He asked a few more questions, trying to poke holes in Andre's testimony, but Andre answered each one with calm precision. Finally, the attorney gave up and sat down. Sarah stood for redirect. "Mr. Coleman, one last question. Why did you decide to speak up that night in the boardroom?" Andre thought about that. Because it was the right thing to do, because people were going to get hurt if someone didn't say something, and because I knew I could help. Sarah nodded. Thank you. No further questions. Andre stepped down from the stand and returned to his seat. Isabella squeezed his hand. You did great, she whispered. The trial continued for 2 more weeks. More witnesses testified. More evidence was presented. The defense tried to argue that the fraud was the work of rogue employees, that the executives had no knowledge of it. But the prosecution's case was airtight, built on the foundation Andre had laid. Finally, the jury deliberated. It took them less than 6 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. People cheered. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. The defendant sat in stunned silence as the judge read the verdict and scheduled sentencing. Andre sat quietly, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. It was over. Justice had been done. Outside the courthouse, Sarah found him on the steps. We couldn't have done this without you, she said. Thank you. Andre shook her hand. I'm just glad it's over. It's not over, Sarah said with a small smile. Now comes the hard part, making sure those workers get their pensions back, making sure the communities get cleaned up. That's going to take years. I'll help however I can, Andre said. Sarah nodded. I know you will. That night, Andre went home to Marcus. They ordered pizza and watched a movie, and Andre tried not to think about the trial or the verdict or any of it. He just focused on being present, on being there with his son. When Marcus fell asleep on the couch, Andre carried him to bed and tucked him in. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him breathe, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. They'd made it. Through everything, they'd made it. And whatever came next, they'd face it together. The weeks following the verdict felt strangely quiet. Andre returned to work, expecting everything to feel different, but the office was the same. The same marble floors, the same glass windows, the same hum of activity. He settled back into his routine, reviewing contracts, working with the legal team, overseeing the Internal Opportunity Initiative. But something had shifted inside him, something he couldn't quite name. One morning in early March, Isabella called him into her office. When he arrived, she was standing by the window, looking out at the city. She didn't turn around when he entered. Close the door, she said quietly. Andre did. A knot of anxiety formed in his stomach. He'd learned that when Isabella wanted privacy, it usually meant something big was coming. She turned to face him. The board met yesterday. We talked about you. Andre's pulse quickened. What about me? Isabella walked over to her desk and picked up a folder. They want to offer you a new position, Director of Corporate Integrity and Talent Development. It would be a significant promotion. You'd oversee not just the Internal Opportunity Initiative, but also our compliance programs, our ethics training, our whistleblower protections. Basically, you'd be responsible for making sure what happened with Reinhardt never happens again. Andre stared at her. That's a huge responsibility. It is, but you're the right person for it. You've proven that you can see things others miss, that you're not afraid to speak up, that you care about doing what's right, not just what's profitable. Andre sat down slowly. What about my work in legal? You'd still be involved, but this would be your primary focus. We'd build a team around you, give you the resources you need, and the salary would reflect the scope of the role. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. Andre picked it up and looked at the number. His breath caught. It was more money than he'd ever imagined making, more than enough to move out of his tiny apartment, to give Marcus everything he'd ever wanted, to finally stop worrying about bills and rent and whether they'd have enough at the end of the month. I don't know what to say, Andre said quietly. Say yes, Isabella said with a small smile, unless you have a reason not to. Andre looked down at the paper again. A few months ago, this would have been an easy decision. But now, sitting here, he felt the weight of it. Taking this position meant stepping fully into the spotlight, becoming a public face of the company, taking on responsibility that would consume even more of his time and energy. He thought about Marcus, about the promise he'd made to be present, to be there. He thought about the community center speech, about the people who'd come up to him afterward with hope in their eyes. He thought about Miguel, Patricia, James, Lena, and all the others whose lives had changed because someone had finally seen them. Can I have a condition? Andre asked. Isabella raised an eyebrow. Another one? Andre smiled faintly. Just one. I want flexibility to keep doing speaking engagements, community centers, schools, workforce programs, places where my story might actually help people. Isabella nodded. Done. Anything else? Andre thought for a moment. I want to bring someone onto my team, someone who understands what it's like to be overlooked. Who did you have in mind? Miguel, the security guard. He's been working in operations for a few months now, and he's incredible. He understands people. He knows how to connect with them. I think he'd be perfect for this kind of work. Isabella smiled. Consider it done. So is that a yes? Andre took a breath. Yes, it's a yes. Isabella extended her hand across the desk. Congratulations, Director Coleman. Andre shook her hand, feeling the title settle over him like a coat that was still a size too big but would fit eventually. He left Isabella's office and went straight to his own, closing the door behind him. He sat down at his desk and let the enormity of it all wash over him. Director of Corporate Integrity and Talent Development. He'd gone from pushing a mop to leading an entire division in less than a year. It didn't feel real, but when he looked around his office, at the documents on his desk and the view of the city beyond his window, he knew it was. He picked up his phone and called Marcus's school. Hello, this is Westview Elementary, the receptionist answered. Hi, this is Andre Coleman, Marcus Coleman's father. Could you let Mrs. Kapoor know I'll be picking Marcus up early today? Around 2 o'clock. Of course, Mr. Coleman. Is everything all right? Andre smiled. Everything's perfect. That afternoon, Andre showed up at Marcus's classroom with a signed permission slip and a grin. Marcus looked up from his math worksheet, eyes wide with surprise. Dad? What are you doing here? I'm taking you out early. Come on, grab your stuff. Marcus scrambled to pack his backpack, practically bouncing with excitement. Mrs. Kapoor waved them off with a knowing smile. In the hallway, Marcus tugged on Andre's sleeve. Are we in trouble? No, buddy. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? Andre knelt down. I got a promotion. A really big one. And I wanted to celebrate with you. Marcus's face lit up. Really? That's awesome. What are we going to do? Andre stood and took his son's hand. Whatever you want. They ended up at the arcade Marcus had been begging to visit for months. The one with the racing games and the basketball hoops and the enormous claw machine filled with stuffed animals. Andre bought a card loaded with credits, and they spent the next 2 hours playing every game they could find. Marcus laughed so hard he had tears in his eyes, and Andre felt something in his chest loosen, something that had been tight for years. When they finally left the arcade, their arms full of cheap prizes Marcus had won, they stopped at an ice cream shop. They sat at a small table by the window, eating sundaes piled high with toppings, and Marcus chattered about school and his friends and the science fair project he was planning. Dad? Marcus said suddenly, his spoon halfway to his mouth. Yeah? Are we rich now? Andre laughed. We're doing okay, buddy. Better than okay. Does that mean we can get a bigger place? Andre had been thinking about that. Maybe. Would you want that? Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, with my own room. And maybe a backyard. We'll see what we can find, Andre said. But wherever we end up, as long as we're together, that's what matters. Okay? Marcus grinned. Okay. Over the next few weeks, Andre settled into his new role. He assembled a team, including Miguel, who jumped at the opportunity to work on something meaningful. Together, they expanded the Internal Opportunity Initiative, creating more pathways for employees to develop their skills and advance their careers. They also overhauled the company's ethics and compliance programs, implementing stronger whistleblower protections and more transparent reporting systems. Andre also started apartment hunting. He wanted something close to Marcus's school, with enough space for them both to have their own rooms, maybe a small balcony or a bit of outdoor space. After looking at a dozen places, he found a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a renovated building, with big windows that let in lots of light and a small park across the street. When he showed it to Marcus, his son ran from room to room, squealing with delight. This is mine? Marcus asked, standing in the smaller bedroom. All yours, Andre said. Marcus threw his arms around him. This is the best day ever. They moved in on a Saturday in late April, with help from Miguel and a few other colleagues from Sterling Global who'd become friends. They carried boxes up 4 flights of stairs, assembled furniture, hung pictures on the walls. By evening, the apartment was starting to feel like home. After everyone left, Andre and Marcus ordered Chinese food and ate it sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. Marcus was exhausted but happy, leaning against Andre's side. "Dad? Yeah, buddy. Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Andre's throat tightened. He hadn't talked about Marcus's mother much over the years. It hurt too much, and he'd always worried that bringing her up would make Marcus sad. But looking at his son now, he realized that Marcus needed to know. "She'd be so proud," Andre said softly, "of both of us. She'd be proud of you for being such a good, kind kid, and she'd probably tell me it took me long enough to figure things out." Marcus giggled. "She was funny? She was hilarious and smart and brave. A lot like you, actually." Marcus smiled and snuggled closer. "I wish I remembered her better." "I'll tell you about her," Andre said. "Anytime you want. I'll tell you every story I remember. Promise?" "Promise." They sat there for a while longer, just the two of them, surrounded by the quiet evidence of a life that was finally coming together. In June, Sterling Global held its annual company-wide meeting, a massive event where executives presented updates on performance, strategy, and initiatives. This year, Isabella had asked Andre to present on the Internal Opportunity Initiative. He'd been nervous about it for weeks, but as he stood backstage waiting for his turn, he felt surprisingly calm. When his name was called, he walked out onto the stage. The auditorium was packed with employees from every department, hundreds of faces looking up at him. He took his place at the podium and looked out at the crowd. "A year ago," he began, "I was cleaning the floors in this building. Most of you walked past me every day and never looked twice. And that's okay. I wasn't upset about it. I was just trying to do my job and take care of my son." The room was silent. But then something happened. I spoke up. I pointed out something that needed to be said. And instead of being dismissed, I was heard. That moment changed my life. But more importantly, it showed me something. It showed me that talent exists everywhere, in every department, every role, every corner of this company. We just have to be willing to look. He clicked to the first slide, which showed photos of employees who'd gone through the program. Miguel in his new role in operations, Patricia in finance, James in IT, Lena in customer service. These are just a few of the people who've participated in the Internal Opportunity Initiative over the past year. Each of them had skills we weren't using, potential we weren't recognizing. And when we gave them a chance, they didn't just meet expectations, they exceeded them. He walked them through the numbers, the success stories, the measurable impact the program had had on the company's performance and culture. Then he paused. "But this isn't just about business results. It's about dignity. It's about recognizing that every person in this building has value, regardless of their job title. It's about creating a culture where people feel seen, heard, and respected. Because when people feel that way, they don't just work harder. They care more. They innovate more. They stay." The audience was leaning forward now, listening intently. "So I want to challenge all of you," Andre continued. "Look around. Notice the people you work with, the people who keep this building running, the people who make your jobs possible. Learn their names. Ask about their lives. And if you see talent that's being overlooked, speak up, because you never know who might be the next person to save this company." The room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, some wiping their eyes. Andre stepped back from the podium, feeling a rush of emotion. He'd done it. He'd used his voice to make a difference. After the presentation, dozens of people came up to him, thanking him, telling him their stories, asking how they could get involved. Andre listened to all of them, shook all their hands, and felt a deep sense of purpose settle over him. Later that evening, Isabella found him in his office. "That was incredible," she said. "Thank you. I mean it. You've changed this company, Andre, not just the policies or the programs, the culture. People see things differently now because of you." Andre looked at her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You took a chance on me when you didn't have to." Isabella shook her head. "I didn't take a chance. I made a smart decision. There's a difference." She smiled, then turned to leave. But at the door, she paused. "You know, when I first became CEO, I thought success meant hitting targets and beating competitors. But you've taught me something. Success means building something that lasts. Something that makes people's lives better. Thank you for that." Then she was gone, leaving Andre alone with his thoughts. As summer arrived, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Andre worked during the day, picked Marcus up from school in the afternoons, and spent evenings helping with homework, cooking dinner, and just being present. On weekends, they explored the city together, visiting museums and parks, and places they'd never been able to afford before. One Saturday in July, Andre took Marcus to the grocery store. It was the same store they'd always shopped at, but everything felt different now. Andre didn't have to check prices or count pennies. He just put things in the cart, whatever Marcus wanted, whatever they needed. As they walked down the cereal aisle, Marcus stopped in front of the marshmallow cereals. The ones Andre had always told him were too expensive. "Dad, can I get this one?" Marcus asked, pointing to a box covered in colorful marshmallows. Andre felt his throat tighten. For 3 years, he'd had to say no to requests like this. For 3 years, he'd watched his son's face fall every time they walked past this aisle. "Yeah, buddy," Andre said, his voice thick. "You can get it." Marcus grabbed the box and hugged it to his chest, grinning ear to ear. "Really? Really?" As they continued shopping, Andre felt tears prick his eyes. It was such a small thing, a box of cereal, but it represented everything he'd fought for, everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd built. It represented freedom, security, the ability to give his son a childhood that wasn't defined by what they couldn't afford. At the checkout, Marcus carefully placed the cereal on the conveyor belt, handling it like it was precious. The cashier, a young woman Andre recognized from previous visits, smiled at them. "Big shopping trip today," she said. "Yeah," Andre said, smiling back. "We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Andre looked down at Marcus, who was beaming up at him. "Just life," Andre said. "Just being here." They loaded the groceries into the car and drove home. As Andre carried the bags upstairs, Marcus clutching his cereal box, he thought about how far they'd come. From a tiny apartment where they'd barely scraped by, to a place with space and light and possibility. From nights where Andre had lain awake wondering how he'd make rent, to a life where he didn't have to worry about that anymore. But more than the money or the apartment or the job, what mattered most was the look on Marcus's face. The joy, the security, the knowledge that his dad was there, really there, not just working to survive, but living to thrive. That evening, after dinner, Marcus poured himself a bowl of the marshmallow cereal and ate it at the kitchen table, savoring every bite. "This is the best cereal ever," he declared. Andre laughed. "Yeah? Yeah, it tastes like winning." Andre sat down across from him. "You know what, buddy? You're right. It does." As autumn approached, Andre received a call from Sarah Chen, the federal prosecutor. The Reinhardt executives had been sentenced. The CEO got 12 years in federal prison. The CFO got 10. The other 2 executives got 6 and 8 years respectively. Additionally, the court had ordered the seizure of all assets tied to the fraud, which would be used to repay the workers whose pensions had been stolen and to fund environmental cleanup efforts in the affected communities. "It's not perfect," Sarah said over the phone. "Some people will never get back what they lost. But it's justice, and that matters." Andre agreed. Justice mattered. It didn't erase the harm that had been done, but it sent a message that powerful people couldn't act with impunity, that fraud and corruption had consequences. A few weeks later, Andre was invited to speak at a conference on corporate ethics and transparency. The event was held at a hotel downtown, attended by executives, lawyers, and compliance professionals from companies across the country. Andre stood backstage, listening to the moderator introduce him. "Our next speaker needs no introduction. Over the past year, his work has been featured in every major news outlet. He's been called a hero, a whistleblower, and a changemaker. But more than anything, he's a reminder that doing the right thing matters. Please welcome Andre Coleman." Andre walked out to thunderous applause. He took his place at the podium and looked out at the crowd. These were people with power, with influence, with the ability to shape the companies they worked for. "I'm not here to lecture you," Andre began. "I'm here to tell you what I've learned. And what I've learned is this. The people you don't see are often the ones who see the most. The janitors, the security guards, the cafeteria workers. They're in every room, every meeting, every corner of your company, and they notice things. They hear things. They know things. The question is, are you listening?" He talked about the Reinhardt case, about the culture that had allowed fraud to flourish, about the systems that needed to change. But he also talked about dignity, about respect, about the simple act of seeing people as human beings instead of job titles. You don't have to create a program like ours, Andre said, but you do have to care. You have to be willing to listen when someone speaks up, even if they're not in the corner office. You have to be willing to admit when you're wrong. And you have to be willing to change. Because if you don't, someone else will. And by the time you realize your mistake, it'll be too late. The applause at the end was even louder than before. People stood, clapping, some nodding in agreement. Andre stepped off the stage and was immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk, to ask questions, to share their own stories. He spent the next hour in conversations, listening, offering advice, connecting people with resources. As the evening wound down, a woman approached him. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes. "Mr. Coleman, my name is Dorothy. I run a nonprofit that helps formerly incarcerated people find employment. I heard your story, and I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to come speak to our participants. A lot of them feel invisible, like society has written them off. I think hearing from you might give them hope." Andre didn't hesitate. "I'd be honored." Dorothy smiled, her eyes glistening. "Thank you. You have no idea what this will mean to them." But Andre did know, because he'd felt invisible too. He'd felt overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, and he knew what it was like when someone finally saw you, when someone finally believed you had value. That night, as he rode the bus home, Andre thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The fear, the doubt, the moments when he'd wanted to give up, but also the hope, the courage, the decision to speak up even when it would have been easier to stay silent. He thought about the people whose lives had changed because of the Internal Opportunity Initiative. Miguel, who now had a career he loved. Patricia, who'd been promoted again and was thriving. James, who was leading a team of developers. Lena, who'd just been named Employee of the Month. He thought about the Reinhardt workers who'd get their pensions back, who'd finally see justice after years of being exploited. And he thought about Marcus, asleep in his own room in their new apartment, surrounded by toys and books, and the security of knowing his dad was there. When Andre walked through the door that night, the apartment was quiet. He set his briefcase down, took off his coat, and walked to Marcus's room. His son was sprawled across the bed, one arm hanging off the side, mouth slightly open. Andre pulled the blanket up over him and kissed his forehead. "I love you, buddy," he whispered. Then he went to his own room, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on the edge of his bed. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo he'd saved months ago. A picture of him and Marcus at the park, both of them laughing, the sun bright behind them. This was what he'd been fighting for, this moment, this life, this future. And finally, after years of struggle, after years of being invisible, after years of wondering if things would ever get better, he had it. The next morning was Sunday, and Andre woke to the smell of burning toast. He jumped out of bed and rushed to the kitchen, where Marcus was standing on a chair in front of the toaster, looking panicked. "I wanted to make you breakfast," Marcus said, his voice small. Andre grabbed the smoking toast and tossed it in the sink, then turned off the toaster. He looked at his son, who looked like he was about to cry, and started laughing. "It's okay, buddy. I appreciate the thought." Marcus's face brightened. "Really? Really? Come on, let's make breakfast together." They made pancakes from scratch, working side by side, flour dusting the counter, and laughter filling the kitchen. When they finally sat down to eat, Marcus looked up at him with syrup on his chin and said, "Dad, are you happy?" Andre smiled. "Yeah, buddy, I really am. Are you?" Marcus nodded enthusiastically. The happiest. They spent the rest of the day together, just the two of them, walking through the park, playing basketball, stopping for ice cream. As the sun began to set, they sat on a bench watching the sky turn orange and pink, Marcus leaning against Andre's side. "Dad? Yeah? I'm glad things got better." Andre wrapped his arm around his son. "Me too, buddy. Me too." As they walked home hand in hand, Andre realized that the greatest victory wasn't the job or the money or the recognition. It was this. These quiet moments with his son. The knowledge that Marcus felt safe, loved, and secure. The ability to give him a childhood defined not by what they lacked, but by what they had. And what they had was enough. More than enough. That night, after Marcus was asleep, Andre stood by the window of his apartment looking out at the city lights. He thought about the janitor who used to clean these floors, the invisible man who'd been overlooked for so long. That man was still part of him, still shaped who he was, but he wasn't invisible anymore. He'd stepped into the light, not because he sought attention or acclaim, but because he'd refused to let injustice go unchallenged. He'd spoken up when it mattered. He'd stood firm when it would have been easier to walk away. And in doing so, he'd changed not just his own life, but the lives of countless others. Andre took a deep breath and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference. But tonight, he was content. Content with where he was, who he'd become, and the life he'd built. He walked to Marcus's room one last time, watching his son sleep peacefully, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. For the struggles that had shaped him, for the people who'd believed in him, for the courage to keep going even when the path wasn't clear, and most of all, for this moment, this quiet, perfect moment where everything he'd fought for had finally come to pass. Andre turned off the light and went to bed, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, he was ready. Because he wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a man who'd found his voice, his purpose, his place in the world. And that was worth more than any title, any salary, any recognition. That was everything.